Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and my most memorable family vacation growing up was the 4-day train ride on the California Zephyr from San Francisco all the way to Washington, D.C. You'll never be able to experience anything like that ever again. It was incredible. What was your most memorable family vacation? Anyway, let's get into today's interview.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome, everybody. I am Raymond. I am your host of the Beginner Photography Podcast, and boy, do we have a good one for you today. And if you have been listening to the podcast for any length of time, you will know that this is our first repeat guest. I had such an incredible response the first time that today's guest came on that I had to have him back on, and I'm super excited to get into this and for you to hear this new shared knowledge that he has. So I'm really excited for that. But first, I kind of wanted to talk about what happened this last weekend. So if you are not part of or if you didn't know, there is a Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group online on Facebook, obviously, and it is a community of other photographers, many just like yourself, who are starting out on this journey of photography, and they just need that community together of building relationships, of being able to share photos and experiences and grow together as friends, essentially. And what has happened is that starting in 2018, I have been doing photo challenges within the Facebook group, and every month there's a brand new theme. It lasts the entire month, and then at the end of the month I do the end of the month I do a Facebook live critique of all the photos that were posted. I talk about the things that I see as a working professional photographer that could be changed. A lot of them are composition changes, some lighting changes, and then things that just make you aware of, okay, next time I should definitely look out for that. And in the hopes of progressing your photography forward, because sometimes if you're all alone in this thing, you just go out, you shoot on your own, you look at the photos on your own, you don't really have that feedback of somebody who can help or can see where there's small mistakes that can really push your photography forward. And the members of the Facebook group have really been enjoying this. So this last week on Friday, I did a monthly critique for April. April's photo theme was standing out, right? Oh my gosh, I cannot tell you enough how proud I am. Just since January, I've seen certain members just really skyrocket the quality of their photography, the skills that they have honed and grew and focused on right? During these critiques has really pushed their photography in a faster direction, essentially. I've seen them grow, and their skills is just, it's incredible, and it is so awesome to see, because I have a front row seat, essentially, is that I get to see everybody post new photos, and over time, through the collective learning process and critiques of this process, essentially, these monthly critiques, they're taking that advice and they're using it to accelerate their photography growth, and it is just so awesome to see. And in fact, Holly said that it is so much fun just to listen and interact with the other community members. And Amanda said that she cannot wait for the next critique. Both posted incredible photos in the challenge, and it is so much fun. And if you think that you would get any sort of value out of that, being able to share your photos and get some feedback, some honest feedback, I don't sugarcoat things. honest feedback. But again, I'm also not like a jerk about it. I really try to make it very constructive criticism. So if you think that you'd be interested in that at all, we would love to have you in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, which you can find just by simply going to Facebook and searching for the Beginner Photography Podcast, and then you should see the group show up there. All you need to do is just answer 2 questions. I just want to make sure that you are a human and that I want to know why you want to join the group legitimately. I don't want you to come in to sell junk or push anything towards the members. It's a very safe place, and I want to keep it that way. So if you are really interested, you have to prove to me that you are a human and that you actually want to be there. And another big perk of just being a member of the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group is that this last week, this is where I share like upcoming information about the podcast. I also share bonus content that I cut out a question out of every single interview, including today. And then I only share it in the Facebook group. So if you ever want more, just a little bit more information out of the podcast, that is where you're going to find it. Those have also been incredibly helpful to members. But what I'm most excited for is that this past week, I made a big announcement. And that announcement is that I have been listening to each and every one of you. And one of the biggest issues that you have when it comes to learning photography is learning how to use flash, when to use flash, what does flash do, and how to properly use your camera while using flash. The basics of on-camera flash versus off-camera flash. These are all things that just seem to be completely mysterious to you listeners of the Beginner Photography Podcast. And I understand it can feel kind of scary, but as somebody who's been shooting with flash for a decade now, I can tell you that it's not that scary. So I've decided to put together an online course of, it's going to be called Flash in a Flash, right? I want this to be quick. I want this to be something that you are going to be able to easily consume, watch, and then put into practice immediately. And because of that, I needed some help because oftentimes I forget that some things that I know about Flash are not common knowledge. So I went into the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group and I said, look guys, this is what I'm doing. I'm doing this for you. I know that you are interested in this and I want to create a resource that is really going to help you be able to learn how to use Flash in an effective, creative, and fun way while being educational. But I need some help. I need your feedback. So I have an open beta group. It's actually closed now, but it was an open beta group where people could sign up and then they can give me feedback on the lessons that I've written, the course outline that I have, just so that I can ensure that when it comes time to actually release, that this thing is rock solid and ready to go. So 2018 is going to be a big year, and I'm telling you, there might be 1 or 2 more courses coming down the pipeline. And if you want to hear what those are and you want to know the news first before anybody else does here on the podcast, the best place to do that is to join the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. So just go ahead and do that right now. It doesn't cost anything. It's just a Facebook group. It's fun. People share the photos and we help each other out. It's a very safe place. And if you're interested, I want you to join right now. So again, just search Facebook for the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group and you should find it right there. Answer those 2 questions and you're in. But if you only answer one of those questions, I'm not letting you in. I'm serious. So answer both questions. I want it to be a fun and safe place. That's why you have to answer both. And come on in. Okay, whew, that was fun to talk about, to relive those moments from last week. But now it is time. It is time for the main attraction of this interview, and it is with today's guest, Marc Silber. And if you remember, we had Marc Silber on last year, and he talked about his book called Advancing Your Photography, which is really, it really helped a lot of the listeners. I got feedback saying that listeners picked up the book, and just some of the techniques and ideas inside really take your photos above just point and shoot type photos. And Marc has come out with a brand new book that I wanted to talk to him about and share some of the information that's going to be in the new book. I've read over the book, and it's not going to be one that you want to miss. I'm serious. And guess what? Here's another plug for the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. Marc has decided to donate a copy of his book to one of the members of the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. And to win, you have to compete in this challenge. This May's monthly photo challenge is something new. So if you want to take any photos, come in the group, join, participate in the monthly challenge, and you could win the book yourself. But we're gonna get on into this. Marc is a total gem in the world of photography and knows what he's talking about. This isn't going to be one that is just full of fluff. However, now that I say that, there are parts in the interview where I say that composition is kind of hard to make a point across while listening to a podcast at times. So if you want more examples, you can just head over to the show notes of the podcast at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. Check out the show notes, and I put some photos, some examples in the show notes for you to look at so that you can get an idea of what Marc is talking about and how you can implement them into your photography. So I've gone on way too long. We're going to get into this interview right now. Enjoy with Marc Silber. Today's guest is known around the world to many budding photographers. He's an author. His last book taught us how to take photos past the point and shoot phase. And now his new book dives deeper into my favorite subject, composition. So today I'm super excited to welcome back Marc Silber. Marc, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Raymond. Happy to be here. I always love talking about photography. It's one of my favorite subjects.
So, you have a new book. Let's just start off with that. You have a brand new book. We mentioned your last book, Advancing Your Photography, and it was a great book. And in fact, I put it on my my holiday gift guide for other photographers because I thought that it was just very well laid out, and all of its principles were very simple to follow. But your new book is all about composition. I kind of want to start off. Let's start from the beginning. Let's get a definition of what composition is.
Well, the simplicity of composition is how you have a frame in your camera. And generally it's a rectangle. I mean, if you're shooting with a Rolleiflex or a Hasselblad, it's square.
Right.
But most of us are shooting most of the time, whether it's a regular camera, DSLR, mirrorless, or smartphone, iPhone, whatever, you get a rectangle. And the simplicity of composition is where do you place your subject to your best advantage or to the most aesthetically pleasing position inside that frame.
Okay, that was a nice, very simple definition, actually. That was very easy to follow. Sometimes I'm worried that the technical definition will always get kind of convoluted, especially like when it comes to like dictionary definitions. But I'm sure that there's going to be some people listening right now. I've talked about composition. I think a lot of the top photographers really stress composition over gear, over a lot of things, right? So composition is out there. We've talked about it. But I think most beginners are going to think, what do we got? We got the rule of thirds. We got maybe some leading lines and framing.
There's 83 of these that I cover in my book, and there's probably more, but I quit at 83 because that really covered the bulk of them.
Right. Okay, so let's get into the other 80, perhaps, that I didn't mention. Maybe not all 80, of course. We're going to save some of those for the book.
Well, here's my story on why I even wrote this book. So, I covered composition in my previous book, Advancing Your Photography, and in my many interviews with lots of photographers, the subject of composition comes up. I mean, here's the thing. You have the camera itself, and then once you understand the camera, there's really two things you have to be in control of. One of them is composition, and the other is lighting.
Yes.
So I was originally going to cover both composition and lighting in this one book. But, I got to a certain point in the book and I realized, wait a minute, this is like serving a full course meal and then saying, hey, we're going to have another meal right away. So I said to my publisher, look, let's break it into two books because I just feel like it's too much information. And they said, yeah, good idea.
Yeah.
And I started with composition because even lighting these days with, natural lighting is pretty easy to work with if you understand some basic principles. So really it comes down to how do you compose? How do you put that subject in the frame to tell the story that you really want to tell? So I started to research it, and I thought, there must be Actually, let me back up for a second. There's two schools of thought regarding composition that I've run into. The Edward Weston school of thought is there's no rules.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of have to figure it out.
Right.
I mean, that's on one extreme, and I'll tell you the truth. I believed that until I started writing this book.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
And then there's the other extreme, which is a whole bunch of rules that you've got to follow, like the rule of thirds. Mm-hmm. Well, is that really a rule? I mean, if you break it, does something bad happen? You know, yeah. It's like the law of gravity. If you defy that, something's probably going to happen that you don't like. You're going to fall down, or your car is going to hit it. You know, it's going to run off the road, or you're going to fall out of an airplane. That's a law.
Yeah.
But the rule of thirds isn't a law. Like if you put the subject right in the center of your photograph, is something bad going to happen? No. So it's a guideline. So basically what I discovered when I really dug into this is that there are no rules, but there are guidelines. But this business of saying that you have to sort of figure it out intuitively would be kind of like telling somebody who wanted to learn to play the guitar, just, there's 6 strings here.
Yeah, how hard could it be? Yeah.
How hard could it be? Just move your fingers around until it sounds good. But that isn't how you learn how to play the guitar. You learn by learning to place your fingers in a chord that sounds pleasing, and then eventually you get down to, Jimi Hendrix if you play long enough. Or let's use a better analogy for most people, which is cooking. How do we learn to cook? You generally read a recipe, right?
Yes.
You follow the recipe, you get good at it, and maybe later you can learn to bend it a little bit, You add or subtract or whatever. But you started off with a recipe. So I thought, why not make a recipe book for composition? And that's why there's 83 of them, because there's a lot of recipes.
Yeah, there sure are. And there are a lot of recipes in this book. And what I love is that obviously you've sent me a copy and I've read over it, and it's laid out in a way that now I haven't seen a physical copy of this book, but what it sounds like is that it's made small enough to take with you in the field. Is that correct?
That's right. You can put it in your camera bag and you're out photographing. And again, like the recipe analogy, look, here's what happens to a lot of photographers. They take 5 or 6 different photographs over and over and over and over again. I'm guilty of that.
Sure. Yeah.
Some things just really work well and you just keep shooting from the same angle. Most people, because they're walking and they're going to see things at eye level, tend to photograph from eye level only. Mm-hmm. That's natural.
Especially parents. That's a very common thing for parents, always looking down.
Yeah, they're looking down. What about getting down and looking up at your child, or from a different angle, depending on what you want to portray?
Yes.
So the first thing I'm trying to do is show people that there's a lot of different viewpoints and angles and ways that you can capture a photograph. And if you have that kind of expanded vocabulary, and I like to use that analogy, Joe McNally talks about the language of light. And, I think that there's also this language of composition. And just like any language, you have to learn how to express yourself. Mm-hmm. If you only know 5 words, you're going to have a very difficult time traveling to another country and getting anything across,
Or even within your own country. Yeah, that'd be difficult.
You'd have a very, it's like you have a baby's a 1 month or 1 year old version of how you communicate.
Yeah.
And as the child grows, that's the beauty. They learn more and more ways to express themselves. And this is the same thing with the language of composition. If you have at least access to these things, and by the way, that's one way you can use the book, which is to carry it with you, and you say, I want a different way of expressing this photograph. Here's my child, and I've shot, sort of from the same angle over and over again. Maybe there's a different way to do this, and you can thumb through the book until something catches your eye. Just again, like a recipe book, you go, wow, that's cool. And there's an illustration that shows you how to shoot that particular whatever it is, compositional format.
Yeah.
And then there's a little descriptive text. I purposely didn't want it text heavy because this is a visual subject anyway. I want to make it easy, and fun. You don't have to read through the whole book. You can just read the little subject and the text, and then there's a summary at the end of it. And there you go. You get to use it.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I did read through the whole book, and I was very overwhelmed by the amount of great information in there. But one thing that I loved was that, and you just touched upon that point, was that the small snippets of information didn't ever feel like we were really getting into the theory of this compositional tool. And it felt like something that, okay, this is exactly what I need to know now, and I can put this into practice right at this moment. And you go off and you just try something new. So I thought that it turned out great. But I think what is as an interviewer, my kind of the most difficult part for me for this interview is that there's no right or wrong answer, I guess.
Right.
Because with photography, it's pretty subjective. I'm sure that some person might think that if you use the rule of thirds, it might be the best compositional tool, whereas somebody else would look at it with the tunnel composition, would think that it's the best compositional tool there to tell the story. So what I kind of want to get out of this is a wide range, I suppose. We've talked a little bit about kind of stumbling upon something and being aware of your environment, right? Trying to find maybe something circular as it's going to add more interest into your frame. But I kind of want to take a step back and talk a little bit about portraits, because I have a lot of listeners who are portrait, or myself, a wedding photographer. When it comes to portraits, there's obviously still compositional tools, maybe not 83 of them.
Right.
But the second that you get somebody in front of your lens, kind of everything gets a little bit wonky. So what are some mistakes that you see beginners making when it comes to taking portraits?
Well, here's the most obvious one. Putting too many things inside the photograph, or leaving too many things there. Mm-hmm. You'll find that the best portraits are the ones that are really very simple. Bambi Cantrell, fantastic wedding and portrait photographer. I've interviewed her a couple of times. Mm-hmm. She's not only a great photographer, she's a hoot. Yeah. She is a hoot. And she gets people to laugh because she loosens them up, And her whole basic thing is, look, it's about the face. It's about this area right here, which I'm showing is like the face and, the upper body, mm-hmm. usually. And the background, really, you don't want that to distract. It's not about a landscape photograph where you're trying to see, this beautiful landscape. You're trying to see the person. Mm-hmm. And less is more. So the biggest mistake beginning photographers make is they don't look at the background and compose accordingly. Now, it's funny because you're usually looking at your subject,
right?
But what's behind them or what's in front of them can either add to or subtract from your photograph. It's very important to look at all, the foreground and the subject and then the background. You want that all to work together.
Sure.
And if it doesn't, it's going to be distracting and you're going to get a mediocre photograph.
Right.
So the basic thing is take things out more than put things in.
Okay, that makes sense. I think that's a great tip. Even for myself, I find it can be hard. You go out for like an engagement session, especially when you have couples and you have to take a bit of a wider field of view, but you feel like you're getting great shots, isolating the couple. Then you get home and you look at the photos and you realize, I guess I just wasn't paying as much attention to my backgrounds as I should have been, and there's a lot of distracting elements. So that's a really great tip for sure.
And the answer to that is actually go to a simple area. So, like if I'm taking a portrait of you and your background, there's too much going on back there. It's great. I see the light and I see your awards and photographs and things like that, but there's too much competing with you. So I wouldn't take a photograph there. I would move you to another area. And I make this point in the kind of towards the end of the book, that you can approach photography as a spectator, where you kind of just, whatever comes your way, you try to take a photograph and make the best of it.
Right.
And that's not the way to be a successful photographer.
Right.
The better approach is to consider that you're active rather than passive. If I don't like the background, I'm going to move you somewhere that I can photograph. And if you're doing an engagement session, or you're going to do portraiture somewhere, there's kind of two ways to approach that. One is to go to a place that has a very open background that's not going to compete. Or you can do what's called an environmental portrait, and I talk about this in my first book, which means leave in those things that have to do with the subject. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if I'm taking a photograph of a workman in his workshop, I would want to photograph them in that environment. But again, place them in such a way that I don't have a saw going through the back of their head, let's say, or something that distracts. So you just have to move them around until you see it. And that's kind of the beauty of photography. You can take a lot of shots and then find the one that really works the best.
Of course.
And just delete the ones you don't like.
Yeah. I love that too. I do that all the time. Yeah. I tell my couples, I'm very high risk, high reward. If this doesn't turn out, I'm just going to delete it. No worries.
I do that all the time.
When it comes to going on vacation and whatnot, you're going out and you're trying to enjoy your time as a photographer, not enjoy your time as a photographer. It should always be enjoyable, but you're trying to enjoy your time either with your family, but you're bringing your camera along with you. Do you have any compositional tools that you love to keep in your back pocket, just to always keep an eye out for, to kind of spice up your, say, iPhone photos?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple that are really easy that you should look for all the time that are great and can really help you. And one of them is leading lines. So a leading line is like parallel lines that go off in the distance. That could be a set of railroad tracks, mm-hmm. or a road or a path, something that leads off into the distance. And a really easy technique is to put your subject, let's say you want to take a picture of your wife. You can take a picture of her close up, and you should take plenty of those. But try this. You come across one of these leading line situations, have her stand towards the background, and then you have the lines lead right to her. So the person who's looking at this, their eye will go right to your subject. Mm-hmm. It's just a natural thing. And that's really fun and easy. There's a lot of other ones that are similar to that. Another one is an S curve. So you see this in the example I use is in the Tetons, Grand Tetons, where I was traveling. I go to the mountains a lot. So there's the Snake River in Wyoming that leads right to the Grand Teton. Mm-hmm. And what an S curve photograph does is it leads your eye. See, it's interesting. The human eye will follow a path, just like when you lay out a trail or a path, your feet are going to follow that path because you don't want to walk on the brambles or the rocks. You're going to naturally follow that path. And the eye will do the same thing. If you leave a path there for the eye to follow, it will go there. So those are two really simple ones. And of course, framing, which is probably the most basic but most useful composition tool, is to take photographs of people in some kind of a frame.
Right.
That could be they're in a door frame. They're standing in a door frame. What does that frame do? It puts an edge around it and it says, hey, here's the subject. I'm putting this edge around it to help you see exactly who I'm looking at. And your eye will tend to go right inside that frame and look at your subject. It's a simple, easy, everyday kind of compositional tool. There's lots of frames. There's door frames, there's window frames, there's an edge of a building, there's an edge of a tree. They're all over the place. So if you use those, you're going to come back with pleasing photographs.
Or more interesting. One of my favorite photographers of recent times, Ryan Brenizer, has a photo at a wedding, which is just incredible. He has a couple on like a bench, and I'm guessing that they're at some sort of park, and he's from New York City, so it's a very busy place. And he got the camera like as low as he could to the ground. It's probably just on the ground. Pointed up at the couple, nice wide lens. And somebody was just coming by, like, I don't know the story behind this, but in the photo there's like a skateboarder like jumping over, not jumping over the camera, of course, but jumping like in front of the lens. So it's creating a frame of the couple because 3/5 of the photo is taken up by the skateboarder in the air doing some sort of trick, and then what's most predominant is the couple being lit, obviously. And it's what it tells me is that you don't always have to look for frames to put people in. Sometimes you can create frames as well, and that's where I think photography gets fun and interesting.
Totally.
You talked a little bit in the beginning about creating your book to be, in the beginning, both composition and lighting. So I kind of want to ask a question mixing the two together. Do you have any tips on creating composition with lighting?
Well, yes. So always use the golden hours to your advantage. There's an app that I mentioned this in my first book that's called, boy, I'll have to remember the name of it. I got it on my iPhone, but you can Google it. It's called Golden Hour app. But basically, the golden hour starts about a half an hour before sunset and goes to a half an hour after sunset, and same thing with sunrise. You're just going to get better, more beautiful light because you're getting yellow and orange light, sometimes reddish. And it also softens because it's a lower angle. So it'll soften the person's skin and their appearance. And that's beautiful for portraiture as well as landscape lighting. So always take advantage of that. And one thing that we always say as photographers, we get up early, we shoot early, and then when that's done, then you have breakfast. and maybe take a break until later in the afternoon. If you're you're traveling, that's the time to go out and do all your sightseeing and shopping. But then be ready to shoot again just before sunset. And even after sunset, even after the golden hour, you have this thing called the blue hour, where the light now turns blue, and that can be phenomenal. You can take, I have a whole bunch of examples of this in my book, but you just get this spectrum of light that now is going to blue, and that adds to the composition. And I make a point in here in the book that color plays a role in composition itself.
Of course.
Yeah, it's not just light at that point, it's also a compositional element. And that's really important. That's where the two kind of cross over.
I have I don't remember which app specifically you had mentioned in the book, but an app that I use is just called Sol, S-O-L. And from there, it's I'm sure the app that you're using is very similar. You can enter in a date, perhaps in the future. You can enter in a location, and it'll tell you when and where to look out for it and what time it starts. It's a very nice visual way of being able to tell when is going to be the best time to go out and capture that light right there. When it comes to composition, you said that there's two schools of thought. The school of thought of like, here's all these rules that you need to follow, and then rules are meant to be broken. Are there any pieces of wrong in, obviously those are just two opposing viewpoints. Are there any pieces of wrong information that you hear being taught to new photographers, specifically about composition?
Well, I'd say probably the most obvious example is the rule of thirds. Again, it's not a rule, it's a guideline.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes.
That you're sort of going to split up. In fact, you can turn on in most cameras and even in an iPhone, I think all smartphones do this now, a grid that you can put on your screen. Okay, it's a guideline, but if you have to stick to that, sometimes the best position for your subject is right in the center.
Sure.
And go around and look at some really great classical portraits, and you'll see many times they're smack in the center of the frame.
Like the Mona Lisa, one of the most
Mona
famous.
Lisa. bang, right in the center of the frame. Now, that's actually another compositional technique, by the way, that I mentioned in the book, which is
Triangle.
triangles. Da Vinci loved geometry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy, everything he did was about geometry, and he seemed to love triangles specifically, and so that's a compositional technique. But I'd say here's the deal. The biggest barrier you could run into is trying to have a bunch of rules in your head when you're composing is a mistake. And I don't want to present my book that way. I want to present it as ideas that are hopefully going to spark your creativity, but you're going to use them in a way that you still have to decide what's aesthetically pleasing.
Right.
Going back to the cooking analogy, you can have a recipe book, but there still has to be somebody awake saying, let's see, am I going to mix this quesadilla recipe with French cordon bleu? It's probably not going to work,
Yeah, I don't know. Unless it's one of these new fusion restaurants.
A fusion thing, but I don't know. Quesadilla, cordon bleu, they're
both cheesy, I guess, but I see what you're saying.
But so there has to be judgment, in other words. And judgment comes from learning a subject so well that you start to acquire, that point of, oh, wow, this is better than that. But to get to that, that's where I'm giving you these set of compositional guidelines and tools that you can go out and play with.
Yeah, I'm really excited to buy myself a copy and put it in my book or my bag rather, because there's plenty of times where I go out and I just I go out just for fun, just to try to find something new, and sometimes even just doing that feels freeing, but you still feel stuck. Like, well, this is just a tree, or this is just some nature right here. And I think maybe just having those small ideas can really, if you work on it, really drive home the pleasure and the fun of photography. So I'm really excited to get myself a copy. Marc, is there anything that I didn't ask you today that you want to make sure that listeners either know of, or any summary points that you want to make to wrap up our time together?
Sure. I think, the biggest thing to me is that nobody has actually put this book together before. I'm kind of amazed. There's a lot of books out there, but no one has actually written a kind of a complete guide of composition. And I had to do a lot of digging and research to kind of pull all these together, both from the interviews I've done that were mentioned by, many different photographers, and my own reading and looking around, just trying to find, well, what did Da Vinci use? What did Monet use? What were some of these classical tools? So what I feel is important about it is providing it all in one easy to refer to place. So I'm hoping people will regard it as such, as a tool, set of tools to help you broaden your vocabulary. And I hope somebody, or at least one person, takes the challenge of literally photographing from beginning to end an example of each one of these things. I think
that you just put a challenge under my listeners' butts, and
that
somebody's
is
going to have to try that.
I mean, really, if you took the summer and you said, okay, over the course of the summer, I mean, look, 83 divided into summer lasts 90 days or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? So you basically figure you're going to take one of these a day, and then you would come away with an understanding of how each one looked and worked for you. Because again, at the end of the day, it has to be useful to you.
Of course.
And the only way it's going to become useful is take it from the book, try it yourself, and see the results. And then you'll go, oh wow, that's kind of cool. And that, in that circumstance, that compositional technique works really well. And then you've got a feel for it. The idea ultimately is to have this become instinctive.
Yes, sure.
But, instinctive is something that really comes about because you've learned something so well, you don't have to think about it anymore. And that's just practice.
Right.
That's just, the sheer amount of how many times you've done something becomes ingrained, and then all of a sudden you've got a real, feel for it.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to bring about more instinctive photographers through this course of study.
I love it. I love it. Marc, you've been very gracious with your time today. You've shared a lot of great information, and I'm willing to bet that somebody listening right now is going to take you up on that challenge, and I'm excited to follow along for sure. Lastly, why don't you let the listeners know where they can find you online and when and where they can get the book?
Sure. Okay. You can find me online at Silber Studios. That's spelled with a B, Silber, studios.com. My YouTube channel, where I've got lots of these videos, is just simply Marc Silber. So if you search for Marc Silber on YouTube, you'll pull me up. The book is probably easiest to find on Amazon. Just, again, type my name in, Marc Silber. Make sure you spell it with a C, Marcsilber. You'll find it on Amazon. It's actually there right now for pre-order. It's set to release May 15th. So that's actually when they're going to ship the books. If you pre-order it now, you'll actually get it at the price that it releases at, which will be lower than what they've got on there right now.
Perfect. All right. Yeah. Well, Marc, again, man, thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your knowledge. I had a blast talking with you today. Thank you again.
Thank you, Raymond. I love talking about photography and love meeting with you here too.
One thing that is very clear when talking to Marc is how much he truly loves talking about photography. This is now the second time that I've talked to him computer face to computer face, and both times, I mean, if you're watching this on YouTube, you could see the smile on his face the entire time when he was talking about these ideas of composition and the masters who created these, right? And it's not all about photography. A lot of photography inspiration comes from early Renaissance painters, especially when it comes to lighting, but composition is a big one too. And because of that, in his book there is a lot of paintings, but paintings I think are just as good as photographs as they were in a real place. Obviously, at one time, it just was captured in a different medium, and it really lets the cream of the crop the cream rise to the top. Yeah, it really lets the cream rise to the top, and you can see the masterful examples of composition within the book. So again, check out his book. If you want a link to purchase the book, you can do so in the show notes of the Beginner Photography Podcast. It's an affiliate link, and if you do end up purchasing the book, I make a very small commission as Amazon's thank you for me sending them your way. But again, I have looked over the book. I have a copy of the book, and it's wonderful. And it's small enough to fit into a bag. You're going to be able to take it with you when you're out in the field, and that alone is invaluable. The idea of having a book that, like, you go out in the field, okay, now I got to read the theory upon why my composition looks like this. It's just too cumbersome. Marc has really broken down all that. He shows an example. He talks about the name of the composition, why the composition works, and how you can implement it. Too. Nice, quick, fast, easy. Check it out. I highly encourage you to do so. This is not a paid plug or anything like that, I promise you. So that's it. Marc, if you're listening, I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing everything that you did. Like I said, you're very knowledgeable about photography, and you sharing your experiences with the listeners, I know that they have appreciated this as well. So again, Marc, I cannot thank you enough. To the rest of the listeners, like I said, Marc is giving away a copy of his book in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. If you want to win the copy, you got to join the group, you got to find the group, answer the 2 questions, start participating in the monthly challenge, and then that's how you're going to have your chance to win. By the beginning of next month, I'm going to critique all the photos, and you yourself could win. How easy is that? So go ahead and do that. Again, Facebook. Just search for the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. That's it, guys. Take some of this information that Marc taught you today and get out there into the world and practice some of these photography composition tools, these techniques, and it will help you elevate your photography to another level, to a spot that is more pleasing to the eye. And when it comes to photography, that's what it's all for. So again, guys, thank you so much. And get out there, keep shooting, have fun, be safe, and I love you all. All right, later.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.